Thank you very much for having us today. And when we thought about this presentation, we really thought about trying to frame it in terms of goals. So in making this movie, when I first began it, my goal was really to use it as a really difficult resume, like one big visual resume piece that I could use to get future jobs. So you can go to the next slide. So a brief history of how I got to that point. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, Bachelor of Arts in Creative Writing from Carnegie Mellon, promptly took those degrees, moved to rural Arkansas where I taught high school math for 2 years, thought about writing while I was down there. Literally everyone said, if you can do anything and be happy, that's not entertainment, you should 100% do that. So I moved back to Buffalo where I'm from, worked as an environmental engineer for a couple years, including a whole week of literally going down into the sewers. Decided I still wanted to try writing. Moved out to LA, worked a ton of odd jobs over the first 2 years, in every sense of the word odd, before I landed on the TV show The Office. So, yeah. So I ended up getting on The Office during season 1. So the only episode I did not work on was the pilot itself. Over that time, I started as a set PA, moved into post-production, moved into assisting the executive producers, and then writing some of the digital content for the website. So like character tweets and webisodes and things like that. So one of the things I can tell you about that job and the different jobs I had is the importance of being your own best advocate. Those were all jobs I had to ask for and advocate for on my own behalf. No one is going to want you to succeed as much as you do. However, people are generally way more helpful than you think they will be. So like, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. So while I'm on the show, between seasons 2 and 3, we have a 9-week hiatus. I am between housing, spend the entire 9 weeks in Buffalo. Buffalo Sabres go on this like crazy Stanley Cup run, came out of nowhere. They were not supposed to be good that year. And they make it all the way to the conference finals where they end up losing. But what I witnessed over those 2 months was an entire community coming together. It was, everyone was your best friend. Kind of when you went out, you had something in common at the grocery store line with the person in front of you. At the gas station, you know, the person filling up right next to you, everyone was your friend. And then when they lost, there were people at the airport with thank you Sabre signs. And so for me, that was what was touching. I had seen how much it meant to everyone over these 2 months. And yet they were still thanking the team after a loss, even though I knew they were hurting. So I just kept trying to make sense of this. Like, what does it mean? Why are you so loyal in the face of losing? And I tried writing essays and doing a whole bunch of other stuff and never really getting it. And it just sort of went into the back burner of my brain. Went back to LA, continued on The Office. Come 2010, so I'd been on the show for 5 or 6 years at this point. I had not gotten anywhere, any of my goals, anything with all my access. As the assistant to the showrunner on one of the top shows, I had access to every agent in town. I was getting nothing read, partly because I was writing 5 outlines of things. I wasn't moving forward. So this led to a very literal depression that I had to get treatment for, like, what am I doing with my life, sort of a depression. And started looking at a whole bunch of different things. One of them was what I like about storytelling. I'd like the collaborative aspect, which is why I gravitated towards TV, writer's room. But to get there, you're writing by yourself all the time. And so I started looking into directing and thinking about that. So as the year goes on, we get to 2011. I've sort of started this new shift in my head. I've had this idea that's been there for 5 years. I'm in Buffalo for a long weekend, and the town is going bananas. Like, a new owner just bought the Sabres team. He's promising a Stanley Cup in 3 years. And it was infectious because all of a sudden, this idea that had sat in the back of my head for 5 years at this point was a documentary. It had to be about real people, and it was about losing. Like, if we won that Stanley Cup, there's nothing special about cheering for a winner. Like, literally anyone can cheer for a winner. So that was April, and you can go on to the next slide. And so I was like, I had to make this movie, and I had to make it right now. Like, there was just this incredible urgency. So Went back to LA, met with Jeff Blitz, who directed the documentary Spellbound, one of my favorites, who I'd gotten to know through The Office. And we sat down and talked, and he was like, yeah, and you could do this or this, and we just bounced ideas. So clearly this idea was not crazy. It was not bad. And so someone I respected liked it. Went back to Buffalo for a hiatus that summer, met with the film commission. I was like, all right, so I'm gonna film this movie, and I don't know who's gonna be in it or where they're gonna go, because it's a documentary that just happens on the fly. Can I film this? Yeah, we can make that work. And so, all right, not a no again. And then, but the key was always the people, right? No one's gonna care about Buffalo or about the Buffalo Sabres, but people will inherently care about people. We are just wired to do that. So in my initial attempts at casting, this is part of the flyer that I literally just went into the Buffalo Sabres draft party and just passed it out to people until the Buffalo Sabres kicked me out, because I was not allowed to do that. And then I went to the Taste of Buffalo the night before I flew back to LA, and my mom and I passed it out to anyone wearing a Sabres jersey. Not surprisingly, there was not a flood of people trying to come and be in this movie. But what I did get, I got 2 people who were interested in being in the movie and 2 people who were actually interested in working on the movie.
Yeah, and that's where I entered the picture. I was one of those 2 people. I was a soon-to-be senior at SUNY Oswego. I saw one of the flyers that Mary had passed out on the kitchen table at a friend's house. And being a film studies major, having just transferred into the program about a year and a half ago from journalism, I was trying to follow through on the advice of all the faculty and administrators there of just be an eager beaver if you want to work in film. Work in any single opportunity that comes your way. So at the time, I was doing script coverage remotely for a production company in Los Angeles. I was also helping a local filmmaker in Oswego make really horrible horror movies. And I decided, well, maybe I should try to pursue a topic and a project that I'm actually really interested in, because I was a Sabres fan myself. And so when I looked at this flyer, I sort of did some Sherlock Holmesing and realized that I think I might know the brother of this person. Tom Wall is and was my high school track coach. And so I reached out to him, confirmed that he was in fact related to Mary, and he arranged a meeting. And so the advice I can give about networking is, like, it really just amounts to being a good person in every single relationship you have and who you meet. It's not necessarily like trying to organize coffees and that sort of thing with people in the industry, because you never know who's going to be connected to who. Like, had I not been a good teammate and good athlete to be coached, I don't think Tom would have put me in touch with Mary or given me a good recommendation, and I might not be standing here today. So just be a good person in everyone that you meet, and you never know where it's going to go. For me, it led to a meeting with Mary, which gave me the opportunity to get involved with this project. I was entering my senior year, so I couldn't do it full time, but she allowed me to work remotely, and what that meant was responding to emails or things like that. So when Mary was flying from Los Angeles to Buffalo in order to arrange these casting sessions, she gave me the password to the documentary email. And so I scheduled frantically this flood of emails that were coming in from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. the morning before the casting sessions, when I had class the next day. And I was kind of, freaking out a little bit, like, oh, this seems crazy. Am I going to be able to handle this while going to school at the same time? But I just took a breath, remembered the advice of, stick with it, be an eager beaver. You want this. This is what it's going to take. And so the other aspect of that was the realization that, man, people are really excited about this project. Like, not just me, people are actively emailing this address, wanting to be in a movie about Sabres fans. It might be kind of special. So that's why I wanted to stick with it.
All right, so how did we get from me being the crazy lady passing out flyers to actually having a flood of emails for Eric to answer? So I had finally gotten my no, right? Every time before, people were yes-anding my my suggestions about this movie, and I hated the no. Like at this point, I really, really wanted to make this movie. So I decided to make a real attempt at casting. So what that meant was taking 5 days off of work for my grandparents' 60th anniversary and doing casting sessions leading up to their party. So what I was able to do is a friend of a friend and was hosting the Top 40 radio show in Buffalo at that time. So I'd met him once, but again, we were friends of a friend, so he let me on the show to advertise for casting. My brother's oldest friend since they were single digits was an editor at the Buffalo News. So he got one of the columnists for the Sabres at the Buffalo News to write just a tiny little blurb, and that led to more. So all that legitimate publicity meant that people had something to share on Facebook that wasn't just like my flyer. So that's how 170 people showed up, and we had those casting sessions. And that's when it became real. Like, this was now a yes. Like, I had people just thanking me for making this movie, for representing them and who they are to the world. They trusted me because I was from Buffalo. And so one person even brought me a t-shirt as a thank you gift. So like, I went back to LA, and I'd been living out there for 8 years. I worked on a show with people I truly loved and that were like family. And I knew I was going to be leaving all of that behind to try and do this. And it was terrifying. So I very literally took denial week, like I called it that. So like, I came home from work every day. I read Harry Potter just to like not be on this earthly planet that we were in for a little bit. And yeah, denial week ended. And that's when I started telling everyone on the show. All right, so told everyone on the show this was late August. By a month later, I was on the road back to Buffalo. Now, one of the first things I did, one of the producers of Parks had also worked in documentary television and advised me on getting photo releases and covering yourself legally for the aftermath of making this movie. So I come back to Buffalo, and I get there a week before we start filming. So what I'm realizing is that in order to get filming notices up, you have to have insurance. In order to get insurance, you need to have a company. So my goals for this movie were to have a career. I could shoot the best stuff in the world, and it does not matter if I cannot use the best stuff in the world. So the entire first month was just spent getting insurance, forming a company, like getting all those steps, working with friends who were lawyers, even though it wasn't their specialty, they agreed to help me. In the meantime, before we could legally hang our filming notice signs, if you look in this picture, so that's Jim in the front, and his two friends kind of standing sentry behind him are doing so that they can block people's faces when they're walking behind them. Because before I could hang a filming notice sign, I get one person's face on camera, and someone's got to chase them down with a photo release, which was my dad's job, who you can see walking behind them. And he would literally just try and pace people so he could avoid having to get them to sign a release. Photo next to that in the green jacket is my sister, who I only shot from behind at this event, so I didn't have to get people's faces. But sure enough, someone turns around, and then my sister's got to go over, explain the movie, and get them to sign a release. So once we got all the company stuff set up, it was very nice. I do not have an MBA or a law degree. I do not know how many of you do, but certainly like start baking cookies for people who aren't getting those degrees, because they are helpful. So eventually we could, hang our filming notice signs, and then people's faces could be on camera. Like obviously all the main participants still signed photo releases and everything like that. When babies were born, the parents were like, I need to get a photo release for my kid now. I'm like, yep, you do. So that was what's happening. But again, at this point, I'd spent so much time forming the company, I had none of these people yet, right? They weren't in the movie. So my goal of making a great movie and getting a career going does not happen unless I have good people to actually be in this movie. So I meet with everyone who I did not originally meet with. There was no way I was meeting with 170 people myself back originally. So we finally get them all on board by the end of November, but things are happening, like the season's unfolding. Actually, really dramatic things are unfolding, and I'm not filming any of it, and certainly not with anyone that anyone in the audience will care about, because it's not permanent people. So I get everyone cast. We do garbage filming in December. And garbage filming is basically like, hey, I'm now around with a camera all the time, and you're just gonna have to get like normalized to this whole process. So sometimes people like acclimate it quickly, and that stuff ended up in the movie. Sometimes it was truly garbage filming. So we did that in December. January, one of the people in the movie was joining the Navy. That was gonna be part of his story. And Navy just kept pushing up boot camp. So he was now leaving at the end of January. So January was the month of Jerry. And now all of a sudden it's February. The season's more than halfway over. I've done garbage filming and Jerry filming, and I've got 11 other people to film. And so what I ended up doing was, you can see this top, that every week, everyone in the movie had to answer all those questions. So both very schedule, what are you doing, but also emotional questions. So it gave me an idea of what to film and how to start constructing their stories in my head as I'm going through the filming process. So, and then that's a little bit of what filming actually looked like in my calendar. And yes, that is a plastic grocery bag, water protecting my camera in the snow. Really, really independent movie. So by 2013, some of these people, their stories had actually ended, some had not, but we're starting to get ready for post. My little DIY grocery bag over the camera is not necessarily going to fly for post.
Yeah, so this is where I come back into the picture. I technically never really left. After graduating, I was pretty involved in a lot of the filming that Mary was doing between 2012 and 2013. And that's when I got to meet all the different cast and people who were being filmed, and really got invested in their lives and started to form relationships with them and really care about them and care about the success of this film. It became more than just using it as a stepping stone to getting to where I wanted to be, which was moving out to Los Angeles. It became wanting to see it be a great movie and lead to a future for my career. And so going back to the networking thing, by virtue of knowing Mary, I was able to move to LA in late 2013. But I still felt this attachment to the project. And so what went on from there was, because I was starting to make real money for the first time in my life, and knowing that there were some hurdles involved with the Fan Connection going forward in terms of the financial plan and what was looming in terms of the post-production costs, I was actually considering making a loan to the project because I wanted to see it through to the finish line. But before that even came to be, Mary approached me with the idea of becoming a producing partner. So taking not just a financial role in the film, but having a place in the practical and logistical, the way it plays out, and being a decision maker and being given some agency and ownership of it. And I seized that opportunity because I just knew that this was going to be a special thing, and I wanted to be part of it all the way through. And so now, as a two-headed monster, so to speak, we dove into what was really probably something we should have thought more about at the beginning filming portion of it, which was post-production.
So first thing, started filming this in 2011, I had a standard def tape-based camera. And I filmed a lot of these people's lives. So the first thing we had to do was digitize over 800 hours of footage. That is a 1-to-1 ratio for anyone in here who has not done that. That means it's 800 hours. So that was our first financial hurdle. As I said, not everyone's story was actually finished at this point in late 2013, early 2014. So I was still actively filming several people. Meanwhile, while we're trying to pay for the tape digitizing, we know that editing and post-production is going to be very expensive. So we are also trying to fundraise at the same time and starting to try and find editors who can organize all this material. Now, that's too much. There are two of us, and we did not give good enough direction to people for how to organize 800 hours of material that they had never seen before. And they weren't the ones digitizing it. They were also not watching it. So that was one of our first missteps that we had to learn from, was there's really no strong alternative to just doing the work and being familiar. Like between the two of us, we filmed almost the entirety of the material, but our memories only hold so much. It's over 800 hours, right, that we filmed. Like there's a limit to what we can actively remember. So that's transitioning. We're trying to do filming, post-production, fundraising. It was too much and we dropped the ball.
Yeah, so believe it or not, my PA jobs in Los Angeles could not bankroll an entire documentary film. So we were very quickly running out of money ourselves and needing to look at an alternative to raise the rest of the funds in order to finish the film. Because of some of the corners that we cut early on in the production process, we knew if we really wanted to make this movie sing, we were going to have to squeeze every bit of production value we could out of the limitations of the footage and some of the sound issues that we had. In order to do that, we were going to have to pay professionals to do that. It's not things that we could do ourselves. We knew the people who were going to be able to do it for us, but we knew that we couldn't currently afford them. So we explored all options that are out there on the table for independent documentary filmmakers. There's grants, incubator programs, fiscal sponsorships. You know, Sundance has a whole section of their agency devoted to this sort of thing. Investors, personal loans, throwing our own fundraising events, crowdfunding. It was all on the table. And what we were learning as we were doing research and even applying to some of these grants and opportunities, for every minute that we were spending on doing this, we were stretching out the timeline of the film because it was a minute we couldn't spend working on the film itself. And so we ultimately decided that the best way to go forward would be trying to raise everything in one fell swoop in one big crowdfunding campaign, because not only would it give us the finishing funds in order to complete the movie, it would help us jumpstart our marketing as well. And so that's what we ended up doing and started doing a deep dive into how to run a successful Kickstarter campaign. And Kickstarter research for us was about 6 months of studying a lot of successful campaigns in the documentary realm. What were the best practices? What were things that we could mimic? We had to get a fundraising trailer together. We had to put a rewards package together to make sure that we had some enticing options for people to back the film. We had to really drill down a budget and come to an understanding of what we would need at the bare minimum in order to finish the film. And for us, that ended up being $96,500. And so that's what we asked for in Kickstarter, because we knew that if we asked for any less, we weren't going to be able to finish the movie. So what was the point of asking for less? And we chose Kickstarter over some of the other crowdfunding options because we really believed in this spirit of all or nothingness. That's the good element about Kickstarter, is it sort of creates this urgency around the campaign, because if you only raise half the funds you are asking for, you don't get any of it. And so we could probably do a whole 45-minute presentation on the execution of our campaign itself. It was an insane fever dream 4 weeks where we were sending out thousands of emails a day to friends, family, coworkers. We were going out into the public to different bars and restaurants during Sabres games with a laptop that we had the campaign up on, and we were playing the trailer and pitching the film to people right then and there. We threw 2 parties and invited everybody we knew to them. We had 2 matching backers. And ultimately, it all led to raising, on the final day, $97,086 with 789 backers, which is still to this day probably one of the biggest accomplishments of my life, looking back on it. I still am just shocked that we were able to pull that off, which was just incredible for the project. And it gave us the opportunity to not only finish it, but have this new sense of accountability and earnestness to really dive into 2016 at this point, with a targeted approach and the means to execute it. Next slide, please. So this is where we really drill down into what were the mistakes that we made in the past and how can we correct them going forward. We had a big issue with organization, and so that was the first approach. What we had in terms of resources was one single Excel document which had a brief description of every single tape. And so in order to get that in a more tangible and useful way for the creative process, we ended up handwriting all the information from the Excel spreadsheet onto individual color-coded cards, which lined up with each character's story and also the Sabres story and the city story. And what this did was sort of mimic the approach to a TV writer's room, where they card out story and then are able to physically move story beats around so that you can see how things are linearly going to play out. So that was fantastic to get that done. And Mary dove into trying to card out individual stories for characters, while I then went and started doing transcriptions for all the Sabres interviews that we had conducted, so that when it came time to start suturing things together, we would have a document that we could do a word search within to see, all right, we have this going on in somebody's character story. Did they ever talk about the Sabres or something that we can use to sort of connect the two ideas together? And that's how we started to really, I think, get a sense of what this story could be for the first time.
All right, so editing, we're gonna run through about 3 years as quickly as I can, because that was the length of this process. So the first thing, it all comes back, to goals, right? We want a movie that people can appreciate and that would help our careers, and that you do not have to be a Sabres fan or a Buffalonian to appreciate. So the heart is still the characters. That has not changed in all the years. So the first thing I did was I took those cards and then I went into Final Cut and I edited the best story I could for every person who was in the movie, all 12 of them. Knowing, and they knew all along, that there would not be 12 stories in this movie. It was not sustainable, but I felt the need to overfilm because I didn't know what was happening. So that took about a year to get everyone's stories. And then the next step is trying to get all the Sabres and the city stories, because that's the layers that make this story interesting. So I'm going through this and eventually get it down to about 40 hours. We started with, we ended up with probably close to 1,000 hours with some of the self-film footage that the cast had done themselves. So 40 hours, it's all on separate timelines. There's like, Act 1 has 3 parts, Act 2 has like 8 parts, it's all over the place, right? And so I have to go back to carding. So up until this point, like, I would do a cut, I would email it to Eric on his lunch break of what a show he was working on at that point. We'd do notes and we'd go back and forth, and it was very accountable and regular. I cannot take all those cards that are on the floor and send them to Eric. There's no way to do that. I got to the point where like the movie was getting so real, and it's such a layered, complicated story. It always had been. And I was stuck. Like, we are now in 2018. Everything's really cranking along, and we gotten all this money from people. Eric had invested his time and money into this. Like, my parents alone had just done untold support for this movie, and I stared at cards. It led to quite literally another depression, where I thought I could not finish this movie, and I was going to disappoint literally everyone, all 789 backers and everyone who had been in this movie. And the character, the people in this movie had allowed me into their lives. Like, I was there when babies were born, quite, almost literally at like an hour after these children were born, they were on camera. So called my therapist again, just like back in 2010, got an ADD diagnosis, which ended up being kind of fantastic because there were now tools, right? So relied on help again. I had a good friend who has nothing to do with the film industry, but she came over every Tuesday and Thursday after work until these cards were made into some sort of story, right? So she would be there to talk me through it, let me just talk it out. And gosh darn it, those cards would look different when she got there because I knew what she was giving up in those moments. So at first it was like the hour before she showed up, I'm frantically rearranging cards all over the floor, but it got done. So this was all happening. I'm back on track. Things are feeling good. I've got Eric's support from LA. I've got my friends, my family there. I get it down to a 3-hour cut, which you have no idea like how beautiful fitting this movie on one timeline was. It was the most amazing feeling. We had our first focus group, which was my parents, my siblings, and then my friend who'd been carding. You know, they had to adjust the volume because I'm really not that expert in Final Cut. I couldn't like adjust it myself, but that's done. And now we have our editor, who we actually hired right out of college. She graduated in May. We started working with her in September. Moved out to LA, and now we have 2 months with Blair because that's what our budget has. And it was fantastic. I mean, Blair was amazing to work with, just incredibly talented, and she added so much to the project that, you know, we went from the 3-hour cut I handed off to her. We got a 2-hour like mini focus group cut. We set up actual focus groups in both LA and Buffalo. It was an hour 45, and then, you know, in the 2 months we got it down to the 90 minutes, and we hit our goal of submitting to both Tribeca and Hot Docs. No, I'm still going. Sorry. So the thing we submitted to Tribeca and Hot Docs was absolutely a rough cut. We had temp sound, temp score, temp color, but we had a story. So what would happen now is that was right around Thanksgiving, the festivals in April, and if we got in, we absolutely have to have a real movie to show them with like real sound, real score, real animation. So we did a lot of remote work actually while I was in Buffalo. A lot of those people were in LA, so this was all like remote before it was kind of hip. And then went out to LA for a couple weeks, did all of that. And the animation, that was my attempt. We actually, for anyone who saw the movie, we hired an actual animator who did wonderful work, and it does not look like that. And so all that happened, and then Eric and I both went back. The color correction and the final titling and assembly was all done by someone in Buffalo. So we came back, and the whole movie was ready by April.
Right, and so as Mary mentioned, we submitted to Tribeca and Hot Docs as our big film festivals and used them as our North Star, so to speak, for our deadlines because if you remember the goal of this film being to lift the profile of Mary as a filmmaker and to lead to future jobs, we wanted to try to find a home where we could do that. And we knew that these big festivals were not only very reputable, but they also were well attended by buyers who could potentially do all the things for Mary and for the film that we were hoping could happen. The reality of festivals, however, is that they're extremely competitive. And while we have good reason to believe we were extremely close to getting into Hot Docs, we did not get into either Tribeca or Hot Docs, unfortunately. And so I can just briefly give some advice and best practices for film festivals based off our experiences. Submit to a wide range. Certainly have your top tier festivals that you're really hoping to get into, but then also have a healthy mix of middle tier and niche festivals. Do your research because curation is a huge part of festivals as well for them. Typically, the blind submissions only represent a very small percentage of their programming, and they're actively looking at all the bigger festivals, the Sundances of the world, and then programming based off of what got into those festivals. So our experience was 45 submissions with 3 acceptances, 41 rejections, and 1 we're still holding out hope for. We had $1,800 budgeted to spend on festivals, and we spent right up to that cap. Getting into festivals is honestly the easy part because you are responsible for the attendance once you're in the festival, because that film festival has 60 plus other films that they're, you know, concerned with. So they're not as invested as getting people to come see your film as you are. And so you really have to do your own marketing. And it was good for us to sort of get this crash course because it really prepared us for the next phase of the film, which was distribution. Yeah, getting people to see the movie. Something we honestly haven't really cracked yet, but we're trying and we are not going to give up. But yeah, the reality is that not getting into Tribeca or Hot Docs or any of the bigger festivals was that there was going to be no distribution deal with a large streamer or a big company. And that meant that once again, Mary and I were going to have to roll up our sleeves and do the work ourselves to try to get the film out there. So as with every other element of this process so far, we started with research, and we talked to local theater programmers and filmmakers who had done a DIY approach to distribution with their films, and drilled down that probably for us, the best approach was going to be a targeted regional theatrical release, where we were researching theaters and indie art house theaters across the country in places that had thematic tie-ins to the film. So Rust Belt cities, cities with big hockey markets, cities with big Buffalo expat populations. And what we also wanted to do was try to get some momentum going for the film before we approached bigger markets like Los Angeles or New York City, which were ultimately going to be the places where the people are who could, again, potentially have an impact on Mary's future and the film's future as well. So we started calling theaters, honestly, and talking to the programmers and pitching the film to them on a one-on-one basis. And that led to us getting bookings. We were getting about 5 or 6 bookings in the first few months of this process. We're talking about early 2020 right now. And then as soon as March 2020 rolled around, I think everybody knows what happened, especially what happened with theaters. It was completely shut down because of COVID for the rest of that year. And we had to once again sort of pivot and figure out what we were going to do in this now world of COVID.
So, yeah, we ended up having 2 screenings in April of 2020 that were indefinitely postponed at that point, and all the other talks that we had been advancing, because these can take months of emails and phone calls to just set up for one theater, were all kind of postponed. So drive-ins opened that summer. We did our research just like we did with theaters, tried outreach. Nothing really panned out. Like, drive-ins stuck to a lot of their traditional models. So there were still some bigger movies that had come out that summer, or they were doing a lot of retro, which is typical of drive-ins, and a lot of horror movies, which is typical of drive-ins. So that didn't entirely work out. One of the things we jumped at, there is a couple online documentary groups that we belong to. And on one, someone had posted in the distribution thread, like, hey, does anyone want to form like a distribution support group where we just help each other figure out COVID and distribution? We all made these movies right in time for a pandemic. We're like, yes, please. And so we joined 7 other filmmakers, all with wildly different films. So what that did is it enabled us to see it through their eyes a little bit, and everyone could kind of work together. So we started looking at the educational market, which was not something we had actually ever considered before. It's part of why we're here today. And then there were other innovations, right? Obviously, everything shuts down. People try and make up ways to accommodate for that. And so new streaming platforms were also showing up. So the 2 canceled April 2020 now became virtual in February and March 2021. So we were able to get some more virtual screenings. And then those enabled us to start thinking a little bigger. So we just had a booking last month, with AARP, which was a huge nationwide screening with a built-in gigantic audience. So we're able to start looking at those things, earning a little money from it, like the movie's at least now paying for itself, which is kind of nice. It had not been for a very long time. So all of this, though, marketing, distribution, publicity, it's a tough game. You know, even before the pandemic, we screened in Pittsburgh, and the reviewer at the Post-Gazette, it's like, this would have been, you know, a non-starter 2 years ago. I would have reviewed your movie. But the changing landscape of newspapers has been that a lot of arts departments are getting cut. So those reviews and articles aren't necessarily coming out anymore either. So it's something that's happening all over, but it's also something we're just still trying to figure out in terms of how to get this movie out there. We know people enjoy it when we do get to screen it, but that's still part of our challenge.
Yeah, and so that brings us to our last slide. The question we get all the time is, now what? And the, I think, underlying topic of today's speakers is the, how do you do what you do and how do you make a living doing it? Well, hopefully we've done a pretty good job of communicating how we do what we do. How we make a living doing it, we haven't yet. So we'll have to get back to you on that. Because the reality is, for a lot of independent filmmakers, you're probably not going to make a living on your first film or maybe even your second film. So you're going to have to be prepared to work jobs in other industries or use the skills that you have to freelance on other people's projects. Mary's had a part-time job for almost the duration of the project. I've worked full-time in the sitcom television industry for a lot of the filmmaking for the Fan Connection. And that's a lot of people's experiences that we've come to discover in our interactions with the documentary community. And if we're going to harken back to the goals stated at the beginning of this film, which was, use the film as a resume builder to get future paying jobs, we're still trying to crack that nut as well, because we know that in the film and entertainment industry, you're only as good as your next idea. So we would be extremely foolish to just be resting on the laurels of the Fan Connection, so to speak, and trying to use that as a way to survive. So we've been exploring other ideas and spent a lot of last year actually developing a scripted series that was going really well for about 8 months. And we did some incredible work on it that we were really proud of. And then right at the end of 2021, everything kind of stalled. And we don't know if that's going to go forward anymore or not. We also have a documentary project that we're trying to get off the ground and pitch. But yeah, it's all relative to our futures and our careers, and knowing that the Fan Connection was the first one, but it can't in any way, shape, or form be the last one. So with that, I think we'll open it up to questions. And yeah, thank you so much for letting us talk at you for a while. Just a humble brag, that's the quickest we've ever gotten through that presentation in any of our practices. We were so worried that we were going to take all 60 minutes just being super convoluted about everything. But yeah, thank you for indulging us.
Hi. Oh, you can hear me. Hello. Nice presentation, by the way. How have you had the dedication to keep with this project? Because I know, because I'm a DHD student, it's I'd be working on something for a few years, but I really value the being able to change into a different project. I'm just surprised how you've been able to stick through it for years and years and years, especially with all the financing concerns and stuff.
It wasn't done. That's on it. It sounds flippant, but that's the really simple answer. We had these goals. I'd invested a ton of money and time into the project. I lived with my parents for most of this. And when I wasn't living with my parents, I was living with other relatives or with friends. There was a lot of couch surfing. During the 2 months of the edit, I moved every 2 weeks. So it was a lot of what I set out when I wanted to do this was to have exterior accountability. That's something that works well for me. So by feeling accountable to my parents, my friends, and Eric, everyone who had given so much, it was bigger than me. There was still you know, the woman who brought me that t-shirt, right? It's gigantic because she didn't know my size, but like, you know, I still use it as a night shirt, right? Like, and so it's like, even that's a reminder that this is bigger than me.
Hi, so you guys obviously worked on this project for a really long time, and I'm just curious, you know, obviously it was mainly you two working on it in the creative department. What were some of maybe just one of the biggest like creative clashes you guys had, like creative differences throughout the process?
That's a good question. Mary and I are usually pretty agreeable, and astonishingly, I don't think really had many clashes in terms of the story at any point. What was really good about our working relationship is we set the boundaries and we set each other's roles from the get-go. And that's, I think, collaboratively, you have to do that in order to have any sort of healthy, functioning work relationship. So Mary always got the final say at the end of the day. She's the director, it's her story. And so I, as a creative producer, had to respect that. I think just to try to do my best at answering your question, I would say maybe some of the animation was when we really, struggled, and it was stressful for both of us because we hadn't really thought about it at all. And then when we started to, we didn't have a clear sense. And I think just that frustration of not having an answer and then looking to the other person and them not having an answer either, I think is where we were maybe a bit combative, and especially with the deadlines looming and everything. That's maybe where things got a bit contentious, but we're still on very good terms, I would say, and trying to work on other projects. So don't worry about us, we're fine.
And I would say one thing with the people we did hire to work on the movie with us, we set clear goals for what we wanted the story to accomplish. And so I expected our editor and our sound mixer and everyone to buy into those goals. But I always expected them also, if they had a better idea on how to reach those goals, like the goals were kind of paramount and I was setting those, right? Eric and I worked on them together, and then people helped it. But gosh darn it, like, you had better, if you know a better way to do it, you better tell me about that. So like, that was also very clear.
Maybe in terms of like the festivals or even now, how have you guys approached like pitching the project, or maybe even more importantly, pitching yourselves without just saying like, you know, we're the best or this is the best documentary ever?
It'd be so nice if that worked, but I don't know. Do you have?
Yeah, I guess we haven't had a ton of opportunity to pitch either the project itself outside of what we believe its merits are. And then the other projects we have going on, we haven't gotten to a stage of really being able to pitch in a serious way yet. But the advice that I've always been given and the things that we're trying to live up to in our potential pitches are keeping it personal. So telling a human story about not just the subject that we're pitching, but us ourselves and why it means something to us and why it is undeniable and why it feels like it's our story as much as it maybe is somebody else's, because the universal is typically only found in the very specific. When you provide very specific details, those are the things that people really latch onto and resonate with. So yeah, we can't really give a ton of specifics because it just hasn't been our experience yet. But very good question. Thank you.
I had a quick one for each of you, if that's okay. For you, you said you worked throughout the entirety of this production, like you worked a job too. How do you balance work and like a passion project? And is there time left over for you to just do what you enjoy?
Sure, yeah, you can have it all. I am living proof of that. You just have to know your priorities and when to prioritize certain things. So for Mary and I's working relationship, when I was working full time and maybe working over 60 hours a week on a show, we knew that we weren't going to be able to have weekly calls during that time. So we had longer weekend calls to catch up. When things were slower, I would take long lunch breaks and we would talk things out while I was working. And so you just look for the opportunities and then communicate with whoever you're working with to make it fit best within your schedule. And then in terms of personal life stuff, yeah, I don't know. I just, I don't sleep a lot, but yeah, I've still lived a very full life outside of any work or projects. I mean, I'm engaged now, and my fiance and I love to travel and do day trips and that sort of thing. So, you know, you find time for yourself and you find time for everything that you're involved with. And if one ever starts to impede on the other, you evaluate and see what's going to be the best for your own physical and mental health, and let that be your guide.
You said a couple of times that you had struggled with depression during this, and it kind of seemed like, because this is something that I've dealt with too, that sometimes your self-worth can get wrapped up in your work and what you're doing. How do you deal with that?
For me, it was honestly a lot of help, right? So it was reaching out to my therapist. It was being very upfront about it with my friends, with Eric, with the people who were going to be around me at the time. You know, it got pretty dark a couple of times. Yeah, I'm not going to lie about that. But yeah, it was being able to reach out. And for me, I'm a very practical person in a lot of ways. So finding the tools for me that went a little bit beyond. It was like, okay, like I can make this really obscene schedule. And sometimes I hate my really obscene schedule, but it gets stuff done. And so like Eric supports me on the really obscene schedule and the details of that. Like I had a friend who came over to help with the karting, even though, you know, she worked in IT, has a bachelor's degree in biology. And then she's like, but I'll show up. And I'm like, okay. So that it was a lot of realizing when it got that bad, the last thing you want to do is talk to other people about it. Cause for me, I did feel pretty worthless, but I felt the need to do that. Like I've seen that with other people. And I knew if I did not reach out to other people, it was just going to get worse.
Hello. So I think I know that like this isn't the first type of documentary that has been made about a certain sect of fans that have been passionate about something. Usually they're mostly fan created, like about fandom X or fandom Y. You mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation that your starting inspiration into creating this documentary was seeing the Buffalo Sabres in this, like, I think it was 2009, 2010, around there in that season, where there was suddenly just a great team and a big boom of fans suddenly rising in excitement for their comeback. What kinds of other themes and influences would you have had, especially with the struggles that you've had in coming together and coming back to this documentary? What propelled you and influenced you into further creating this documentary? And do you think that those themes could be generalized more beyond Buffalo Sabres fans to just sports fans in general who are passionate about other teams?
Yeah. So I think it's not just other teams, but other cities. So again, we're still really struggling with the marketing and publicity. Certainly, if anyone is good at that, please reach out to us. Like our emails are on our website, fanconnectionmovie.com. It is not that hard to find us. But in terms of the themes, when we go out and we do screenings, right, there was at the very first screening we had, our world premiere was at noon on a Thursday, right? So it was my aunt, my uncle, 2 other people, and then the people from the movie theater who didn't have work to do that were made to come in and do that as part of their job to watch my movie. But one of the 2 other people who was there that actually bought a ticket, she came with a friend. She not only did not like sports, but actively hated sports, did not understand it at all. and was like tearing up afterwards talking to me about how she understood it now. So we screened in Pittsburgh. When doing the Q&A, there was a man who in Pittsburgh at the time was from Dayton, Ohio, and was tearing up because the story of Buffalo reminded him of Dayton, Ohio. So I think there is something like what Eric had said earlier, something we tried to always get at in the stories of the people we were telling is like within specificity, there is universality. So not everyone, has cerebral palsy, right? But how many people, it was a smaller crowd last night, relate to Mark's story, right? Because they've felt the emotions that he's felt. It's a different thing. So that's what we're still trying to communicate. But yeah, I absolutely believe when we screened at another university, they're like, oh my goodness, this is my whole family of Mets fans is this movie, right? So yeah, it actually, we know it does relate. We haven't figured out entirely how to communicate it yet.
Hello. I think for a lot of us in this room, there is no guarantee after our degree. It is 100% passion driven to do and create and make something. What advice can you give us to really no, just do it. Just you gotta just do this thing that is important to you in your heart to keep going, because there is no guarantees. And I think that scares a lot of people. What would you say, having gone through this whole process of making your own documentary, not only for the people in the doc and for the city of Buffalo, what kind of guides that passion to keep going through all the adversity?
I can try it, or you want to? Okay. We might both have something to add here.
Yeah.
So, when Eric was asked about his life balance, right? And that's something everyone has to figure out. I remember when I was working that engineering job, and I had a friend who was going for a PhD in English, and we were sort of following these things that it seemed like good ideas, right? And so at 25, we were having these discussions of what is the difference between giving up and changing your mind? And those are two very valid and very different things. And so it takes a lot of discernment to tell the difference sometimes. Changing your mind is 100% okay. And honestly, people give up on things, it happens, right? So for me, this was always something I wasn't changing my mind about. And so I had so much support. So for me, it did mean things like, I've only had a part-time job since 2013 that brings in money, and part of it had to pay the other people to work on this, right? So it meant getting over myself and living with my parents as a 30-year-old, right? But that was something I was willing to do, my parents were willing to do. So not everyone has that support system or is willing to do that. So it's okay though for it to go either way.
Yeah, and I would say as much as you can, find your people, because you don't have to go it alone. And look around in this room. Who are your friends? Who are your colleagues? Who are your people that you may want to collaborate with? Mary spoke about your support system, your friends, your family outside of the university. Who are the people that are going to encourage you in your idea and actively take investment in it? Because we are a two-person operation, but if you watch the end credits of our film, there were hundreds of people that had an influential part in it that we could not have made or completed without their help. So don't put the pressure on yourself to feel like it's you against the world. Find your people and then build a community and attack it together.
Thank you.
One general question besides organizing, what is there anything that you preferred went different for the project? Decision wise, or that you everything went okay, but what is like the one change that you prefer to make?
Yeah, I love these questions that require so much self-reflection on the spot. If there was a way for us to have not shot on DV tapes, which I don't think there was at the time, but yeah, if we had already had the footage in a digital form, I think that would have helped a lot. And then also, I think the advice I would give myself looking back is just be patient. I think a lot of our decisions and a lot of our early missteps were made because we felt this urgency and pressure that we were arbitrarily putting on ourselves of, we have to finish this movie in the first 2 years, when really if we had just taken a step back and taken a breath, we could have seen this is probably going to lead to this very poor outcome. Let's think of another alternative.
And I would say one of the things that's always stuck with me, it's a very technical thing, is I would have put a better tripod. Like, it sounds crazy, like it's so minimal, but like I had a $30 Radio Shack tripod, and like our poor sound mixer, like they should really give out Oscars for like before and after, because what that man did was astounding. Like, and you turn it, you know, like it just makes noise every time I turned it. And so he had to take so much of that out of the movie while trying to keep dialogue that was in there. So I don't know, that's a simple thing, but I would have bought a much better tripod.
All right. Thank you.
So let's give a hand to Mary and Eric.